I never planned to stay late that night. Honestly, I was just trying to avoid traffic. At least that's what I told myself. But when I looked over my shoulder and saw him standing there, leaning against the doorframe with that faint smile, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal evening. My name's Clara, and I work in marketing at a sleek downtown firm that's obsessed with deadlines and presentation slides. It's the kind of place where suits feel like armor and late nights are a quiet battlefield for promotions. That's why I didn't think much of it when Ryan stayed behind too. Ryan was the firm's creative director, sharp, confident, and the kind of guy who filled a room without even trying. He always looked just a little too relaxed, like he knew. Something the rest of us didn't. I'd noticed him watching me before. Small glances during meetings, quick half smiles when we passed in the hallway. But he was married, and honestly, that should have been enough to make me keep my head down. Except tonight, there was no one else around. The office had that eerie, quiet, just the faint hum of the vending machine and the occasional creak of floorboards shifting in the dark. I was at my desk, half-heartedly tweaking a client pitch, when I noticed Ryan across the room. He wasn't at his usual corner desk. He was at mine, flipping through my notes like he had every right to be there. "Looking for something?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't even flinch. Just turned the page, then set the papers down. "Just curious," he said, his voice low and slow. "You've been putting in a lot of late hours." Trying to keep up, I shrugged. I should have told him to leave, should have made a joke or turned back to my screen. But I didn't. Instead, I stood and crossed the room to him. "And what about you?" I added. "Don't you have somewhere else to be?" His smile widened just a little, that smile that said he knew exactly how dangerous this was. "Not tonight." I should have walked away. Should have pretended none of this was happening. But instead, I lingered there, my hand resting on the edge of my desk. I could smell his cologne, clean, faintly spicy, and suddenly the air felt too warm. "You know," he said, "I've been meaning to ask you something." I swallowed. "Yeah? That client pitch you put together last week? The one Logan presented?" His voice dipped lower. "That was your idea, wasn't it?" I laughed softly, more surprised than amused. "I thought no one noticed." "Oh, I noticed," Ryan said, stepping closer. "I notice a lot of things about you." For a second, I couldn't breathe. His eyes lingered on mine, and I knew this wasn't just office talk anymore. "Ryan," I started to say something, anything to break whatever this was. But before I could finish, a sound echoed down the hallway. Footsteps. Fast, purposeful footsteps coming straight toward us. Ryan's gaze flicked to the door, then back to me. "You should go," he murmured. "Now." I grabbed my bag and started toward the back exit. But before I left, I glanced over my shoulder. Ryan was still standing there, still smiling that faint smile. Like he knew something I didn't. I didn't know who those footsteps belonged to. But I knew one thing for sure. Whatever Ryan and I had just started, it wasn't over yet. You won't believe what happened the next day. Stick around for the rest of my confession. The next morning, I told myself it had all been in my head. Just some meaningless tension stirred up by too much caffeine and too little sleep. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the memory of Ryan's voice lingering in my mind. But around noon, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, no markings, just a plain white envelope. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. Inside was a sticky note, scrawled in sharp, deliberate handwriting. "Conference room, 6 p.m. I stared at it for a long time, my pulse racing. I should have crumpled it up. I should have ignored it altogether. But when 6 o'clock rolled around, I found myself walking down the empty corridor, heart pounding in my chest. conference room was dimly lit, only one lamp glowing in the corner. Ryan was there, sitting casually at the table like he'd been waiting all day. He looked up as I walked in, that same faint smile playing at his lips. "You came," he said, sounding almost surprised. I folded my arms. "What's this about?" He slid a folder across the table. "I wanted your thoughts." I frowned, flipping it open. It was the layout for an upcoming campaign, one I hadn't been assigned to. "This isn't mine." "I know," Ryan said. "But it's a mess, and I figured you're good at fixing things." I knew better than to fall for flattery. But something about the way he said it, low and smooth, made my stomach tighten. "Why didn't you just ask me during the day?" "Because this." His eyes locked on mine. This wasn't exactly about the campaign. I should have left right then. Instead, I sat down, not because I believed his excuse, but because I needed to know what he wasn't saying. "Last night," Ryan said quietly, "whoever was in the hall, that was Logan." I blinked. "Logan?" He nodded. "He's been asking questions about you. Wants to know why you're suddenly getting so much attention." Ryan leaned closer, voice dropping. "He's digging for something." My heart jumped. Logan was one of the senior managers, ambitious, smug, and always looking for a way to climb higher, if he thought there was something to expose. "Why would he care?" I asked. Ryan's smile tightened. "Because he thinks we're involved." The air seemed to thicken around us. I shook my head. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "Because if you keep showing up in empty conference rooms with me, he's going to find something to prove it." He was right. I knew he was right. And yet, I didn't move. Instead, Ryan stood and walked to the door, flicking the lock shut with a soft click. "Look," he said, "I'll handle Logan. But you need to decide what you want." He turned back toward me, his eyes darker than usual. "Because if you keep playing this game, Clara," his voice dipped dangerously low, "you're going to get burned." I stood, grabbing my bag. "I'm not playing anything." Ryan smirked like he didn't believe me. "We'll see." I was halfway down the hall when my phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. "You should be careful who you spend your evenings with." My blood ran cold. I stopped walking, glancing back toward the conference room. The blinds were drawn now, but I knew Ryan was still inside, still watching. I wasn't sure who was playing games anymore, but I knew one thing. I was already caught in the middle. You won't believe what happened next. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. I spent the rest of the week watching my back. Every time I passed Logan in the hallway, I swore I felt his eyes on me. He never said anything outright, but the way he smirked, like he knew something, made my skin crawl. But what bothered me more was Ryan. He acted like nothing had happened, like that locked conference room door and the warning in his voice meant nothing at all. I caught glimpses of him in the break room, at meetings, even once at the elevator when I was sure he wasn't supposed to be on my floor. Each time I felt his eyes linger a little too long, like he was waiting for me to slip up. And then, Friday afternoon, I did. It was nearly 5 when Logan's email hit my inbox. A forwarded thread, one I was never supposed to see. Subject: concerns about Clara's conduct. From Logan Grady. To Richard Moore, HR Director. I'm concerned that Clara's recent interactions with Ryan are crossing professional boundaries. There's been whispering in the office, and I feel it's my responsibility to report it. I read it twice, bile rising in my throat. Logan wasn't just suspicious, he was trying to destroy me. Panic surged, and before I could think better of it, I grabbed my phone and called Ryan. "Meet me in the stairwell," I blurted the moment he answered. "Now!" The stairwell was dim and quiet, the one place I knew Logan wouldn't overhear us. Ryan was already waiting when I arrived, leaning casually against the railing, like this was some casual after-work chat. "What's going on?" he asked. I held up my phone. "Logan's trying to drag me down with you." Ryan barely reacted, just sighed and ran a hand down his face. I figured he might pull something like this. "You knew?" My voice shot up. "And you didn't say anything?" I didn't think it would get this far. He stepped closer, voice softer now. "Clara, listen. If Logan's pushing this hard, it's because he's bluffing. He doesn't have proof." "He doesn't need proof," I shot back. "All he has to do is make people wonder. And then HR steps in." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Then we give them nothing to wonder about." He was too close now, his hand resting lightly on the railing beside mine. I could feel the heat of him through his shirt, and the way his eyes lingered. God, it was like gravity. "You mean we just pretend none of this happened?" I asked. "You think it's that easy?" His voice dipped low again, that same warning tone from before. "You think Logan's going to stop? Then what do we do?" My voice broke slightly. "I can't lose this job, Ryan." "You won't," he said. And before I could pull away, his fingers brushed against my wrist. Barely there, just a trace of contact, but enough to make my breath catch. "Ryan," I whispered. "I'll handle him," he said softly, fingers still tracing the inside of my wrist. "I promise." He meant to leave it at that. I know he did. But in that small, quiet space, something shifted. His fingers lingered, and without thinking, I turned my hand over, letting our palms press together. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with something neither of us could ignore anymore. "Tell me this isn't what you want," he murmured. I should have told him to back off. But instead, I let my fingers curl around his, and that's when the stairwell door opened. We sprang apart like teenagers caught sneaking out, but it was too late. Logan stood frozen in the doorway, his face twisting into a grin that made my stomach sink. "Well, well," Logan drawled. "Guess I was right after all." He didn't wait for us to speak, just turned on his heel and disappeared down the hallway. I felt Ryan's hand on my arm, steadying me as I swayed. "Don't panic," he said quietly, but my mind was already spinning. Logan had exactly what he needed now. Not whispers, not guesses, but proof. And I knew. This was far from over. If you think Logan stopped there, you have no idea what happened next. Stay tuned. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Logan's smug grin and heard the door creak open all over again. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, Logan wouldn't keep quiet. I walked into the office feeling like I was holding my breath. People were watching me, or at least it felt that way. Eyes flicking up from keyboards, whispers cut short when I walked by. Either Logan had already started spreading rumors, or I was spiraling. By noon, my fears were confirmed. "Clara?" Richard Moore, our HR director, appeared beside my desk. "Can you come to my office?" My stomach dropped. I grabbed my notebook, like I could somehow turn this into a routine meeting, and followed him down the hallway. When we reached his office, the door was already ajar. Ryan was inside. He stood near the window, arms crossed tightly over his chest. His eyes flicked to mine, just for a second, but it was enough. He was tense, worried. Richard gestured for me to sit. I did, pressing my hands together in my lap to keep them from shaking. "Listen," Richard started, his voice calm and professional. I've been informed there's concern about your relationship with Ryan. I swallowed hard. Concern? Logan mentioned seeing something? Questionable, Richard continued. Now, I'm not here to accuse anyone of anything, but we have policies, and if there's any conflict of interest— There's no conflict, Ryan interrupted. His voice was firm, but there was something sharp underneath. Clara and I haven't done anything against policy. Richard looked at him with mild disbelief. Logan claimed otherwise. Because Logan's been looking for a reason to push me out for months, Ryan snapped. He's had it out for me since I landed the grant account. And why would he drag Clara into it? Richard's gaze shifted to me now, softer but still skeptical. I hesitated, and that's when Ryan spoke again. Because I asked Clara to help with my projects. Late hours, conference room meetings. I leaned on her too much, and now Logan's twisting it. I whipped my head toward Ryan. What? I'll take the blame, Ryan said quietly, more to me than Richard. If anyone's getting written up, it's me. I wanted to be angry, furious even, but instead, I just stared at him. Ryan was putting everything on himself to protect me. There's no blame to take, I said firmly. We didn't break any rules. Richard sighed, running a hand down his face. Look, I'm not writing anyone up today, but if there's any truth to this, you need to be careful. Both of you. He gave us a pointed look, then dismissed us. Barely waited until we were out of his office before turning on Ryan. Why would you say that? I hissed. You're risking your job. I'm not letting you take the fall for this, he said quietly. Logan's not going to stop, Clara. He's going to keep digging. I can handle him, I shot back. But Ryan just shook his head. You don't know what he's capable of. His voice was too serious now, like there was something he wasn't telling me. What does that mean? I pressed. Ryan, what else is going on? For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, he handed it to me. It was a screenshot, an email. From Logan, sent 2 weeks ago. Subject, creative team concerns. I've noticed Ryan spending a lot of after hours, time with Clara. I'm not suggesting anything improper, but if we want to maintain team integrity, I'd suggest considering new leadership in creative. He wasn't just spreading rumors. He was trying to get Ryan fired. That's why you've been acting so calm, I said slowly. You've been trying to stop him this whole time. I didn't want you caught in the middle. Ryan's voice was quieter now, his eyes searching mine. But I should have told you sooner. We stood there for a long moment, just staring at each other. The air felt heavy, not just with tension, but something deeper, something undeniable. I need to fix this, I whispered. You don't have to, Ryan said. But I shook my head. No, this is our mess now. I turned and walked away before I could second-guess myself. My pulse thundered in my ears as I marched toward Logan's office. He was inside, smugly typing at his computer. His eyes flicked up as I stood in his doorway. Can I help you? He asked, voice syrupy and fake. You know, I said. I thought you'd be smarter about this. Logan raised an eyebrow. About what? About leaving a paper trail, I shot back. Ryan showed me your email, the one where you tried to push him out before you had any real proof. Pretty reckless for someone who likes to play smart. His expression faltered, just for a second. I'm guessing HR won't love seeing that, I added, folding my arms. Especially since they know now that you've been making false accusations. Logan's face darkened. You're bluffing. I tilted my head. Why don't you find out? For a moment, I thought he might argue. might throw one last threat my way. But instead, he just grabbed his phone and muttered, "This isn't over." I smiled thinly. "No, it's not." But as I walked away, my pulse still racing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd won the wrong kind of battle. Logan wasn't the type to back down easily. And Ryan was still standing at the end of the hall, waiting for me. When I reached him, he didn't say anything, just stepped closer, his fingers brushing mine again. "We should probably stop this," I said softly. "Yeah," Ryan murmured. "Probably." But neither of us moved. You wouldn't believe what happened after that, but that's a confession for another time. Subscribe if you want to hear the rest.